Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Tasteful Pairing, a show where I mush together two things that I think complement each other. Although, tonight's pairing is more of a contrast between two Metroid fan games. The first, I think, is the absolute pinnacle of comforting 2D Metroid gameplay, with a garnish of convenience features and extra control customization. It's a more simple Metroid adventure that makes a fine entry point into the franchise, though I would still recommend starting with Metroid Zero Mission. The other game, as its name suggests, subverts a lot of conventions of the series, creating a long and punishing experience only for practiced bounty hunters. Many series tropes get played with, and features are finagled to create bizarre puzzles, glorious set pieces, and a sense of intrigue and investigation. Both of the games tonight have fantastic music, beautiful pixel art, and in my opinion, two of the most awesome endings in the Metroid series. Unfortunately, I can't tell you about how to get either of these games because that company would probably get quite angry. My apologies, but you'll have to do most of the research on that yourself if these games interest you. Now, begin approach trajectory. Our first mission this evening is another Metroid 2 remake, the passion project of Dr. M64, nearly a decade in the making. It was sadly DMCA'd by that company, but in a way it all worked out in the long run, with Mr. Guasti ending up working at Moon Studios, helping them make Ori and the Will of the Wisps. AM2R perfectly encapsulates all the appeals of the Metroid games: action, exploration, and a foreboding atmosphere in a masterfully crafted world, full of suspense and secrets and isolation. Good world design is the key to Metroid, because it needs to funnel you into progressing while making you think it was entirely your own intuition. AM2R certainly does that brilliantly, with an added convenience in the form of the distribution center. It's a little fast travel hub that sends you around the world with very little effort. There are a couple of effects I don't think could have been achieved on GBA hardware, but AM2R could nearly slot in as the triplet to the Zero and Fusion twins. In fact, one of the other things I appreciate a lot about AM2R is the immersion and tension it creates. This isn't Fusion or Dread, but it's still grim. I always prefer Metroid games that lean into the original Aliens inspirations or into suspense in general. Dingy cave tunnels, derelict Chozo facilities, dank flooded passages, dreary Metroid nests. This is not noble privateering against space pirates, this is not standing in awe of the Luminoth. We're getting ground up in water turbines, dodging malicious barbs, platforming over acidic growths, while occasionally the Earth itself heaves and rattles around us. This journey is a brutal, aggressive extermination of the deadliest feral creatures in the galaxy, by the deadliest bounty hunter. For the most part, Samus controls fantastically responsively and the fighting feels good. You get all the beams, all the suits, all the powers, lasers sound harsh and missiles have a nice rumble to them. Wall jump, shine sparking and ball sparking are all here too. The one issue I have with controlling Samus in AM2R is that the animation of turning around prevents shooting. This caused a lot of issues fighting highly mobile enemies, which almost all Metroids are, and limited what I was capable of in a lot of situations. It quite often caused a domino effect of further mistakes in short succession, but it was only fatal once from what I can remember. This is counterbalanced a little by the controls being very customizable, including changing the behaviour of things like morph ball, missile and angled aiming, and some convenience features like auto-mantling over single or half blocks as you run along. If you've never played a Metroid game before, AM2R is a pretty good starting option. If you're a veteran who somehow hasn't played it, it's really just more of what you already like, with a bit more lore through codex entries and topped off with possibly the most cathartic final boss in a Metroid game. It's a bit more linear, intuitive, has lots of convenience, and is short to average length, which contrasts drastically against our second mission for the evening.
And now for something completely different.
Super Metroid Subversion was made as a showcase of a tool called Smart, which makes Super Metroid ROM hacking easier. But that isn't my bailiwick, so I'll keep my criticism of Subversion simply to how it plays as a game. As a game, Super Metroid Subversion is very long, inconvenient to explore, incredibly confusing, and a step up in difficulty over Super Metroid. I believe it is absolutely worth playing despite a couple of very noticeable flaws, but if you're taking that very intimidating previous statement as a challenge and you're not a series veteran, I highly recommend playing through Zero Mission, AM2R, Vanilla Super Metroid, and probably Fusion as well for good measure before trying to tackle Subversion. If you aren't familiar with the things it's trying to subvert, it's probably not going to hold you very well. Subversion's mobility is still based on Super Metroid at its core, so the issue I had with AM2R's movement is gone here, and I was able to be my usual highly agile self in combat, even when using my arcade stick. Originally, that was just supposed to be a joke at the end of the Kiwi Doom 2 video, but after using it for a few minutes and seeing it was a perfectly acceptable substitute for a gamepad, I ended up sticking with it for both games. I wouldn't recommend going out and buying one just for something like this, but it was certainly an interesting way to play. Jumping back to the Super Metroid movement system, if you look on the Metroid construction page where you can download the Romhack, they say advanced techniques like wall jumping and air morphs are never needed to progress. But knowing these things will definitely help with navigating the world of TN578, which can be very tedious even at the best of times. As just one example, I wanted to try and find a secret area that I had vaguely read about when asking for help on the Smart Discord. I thought it may have been around about here. I couldn't get there from the zone I was in because it was cut in half. I had to backtrack through a previous zone to get into the lower half, only to discover that route was blocked. To try a potential other path to that secret, I would have had to sidetrack through about 4 zones worth of travelling across 2 different biomes. Then, whether or not I was successful, I would have had to backtrack through all 4 of those zones to get to where I could actually start progressing again. It's taken to an almost satirical degree, like someone who hates Metroid specifically because of the backtracking wanted to show everyone how they feel. With all of that said, however, I have to re-emphasize that Super Metroid Subversion also does some really good subversive stuff. Otherwise I wouldn't have just played it for a third time and come away still willing to recommend it to people. The journey unfolds in some very unusual ways, of which I'll toss out a couple of early game examples. Ridley is invulnerable when you meet him in the opening, and he throws you out of an airlock, which is a fun little set piece. Gravity's insanely high on TN578, which totally reworks the opening 10 minutes or so of the game, forcing you to really get to know your environment until you can work your way to the bottom of the ocean for gravity boots. As you come across interesting new puzzle elements, like Ridley's mention imperviousness, they get recorded in the new log feature to remind you of them later. Many won't though, like the puzzle that requires you taking off your gravity boots, or the one that's basically a time trial for shooting missile targets. Super Metroid Subversion is a very difficult ROM hack to get through, but I think the pacing and issues in the map design are worth the slog in order to get a very interesting, non-standard Metroid experience. For as difficult as the world is to explore, it's still a world I wanted to explore, and the lore and the log entries helped to suck me in. Most importantly, for as frustrated as I got at Subversion, and for as long as each playthrough took me, every time I closed down Mesen-S to take a break, I wanted to boot it back up 5 minutes later, to see what the next weird puzzle was, or to see what the next crazy set piece moment is. I even still have incentives to come back at some point too, to find the alternate path through the final escape sequence, to get to that forbidden room that I didn't manage to this time. And there's an entire page of challenges to unlock the second quest mode. This is one of those games that I'm going to have stuck in the back of my mind for years, because I will always have an excuse to play it again. And with that, that's pretty much everything I have for you tonight. As an aside, before we all get out of here, I've mentioned before I'm not a fan of social media or big internet communities, but I thought it would be nice to have a place to catalogue and talk about interesting entertainment. I know what Discord is like, and unfortunately how a lot of its users behave, but I've tentatively created a server for people to come and talk about the unusual media they enjoy and why. Spurk about retro games, post devlogs and articles, spread weird indie YouTube animations, share cool wallpapers and music, all sorts of stuff, as long as it's a departure from the norm without just being gross and degenerate. I've even made a little section where I have a non-exhaustive list of some of the projects I'm thinking about making and the things I'm trying to learn or investigate. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I have been Ash the Conjurer, your Ludo Kino sommelier for the evening, and if you'll excuse me, I have some wars to win.